Information in this podcast is of general nature only. It does not take into account your personal needs or objectives. Before investing in any product, you need to consider your personal situation, needs and objectives. Always seek professional advice for your particular circumstances and needs prior to investing.
Lauren, g'day. How are you?
Hi, Dave. I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. Just us two today.
Yes.
And one of the staff at Disability Housing Solutions thought about coming to join us today, talk about a really cool topic, but chickened out about being on the podcast. So
the nerves got the better of her, but one day we'll get her here.
We'll keep encouraging her to join us sometime.
That's right.
So we were just sort of prepping before we went live here, and today's a really interesting topic. And it seems to be a sort of shrouded in a certain amount of mystery out there with different stakeholders. And that is in the world of SIL houses, SDA houses, how can a SIL provider transition their people from a SIL house where they're carrying the expense and the risk of vacancies and transition to an SDA house while still maintaining their client base but eliminating administrative and cost overheads with anything to do with property, right?
Yeah.
And so you go.
Oh, so it's going to say overall, it's a big discussion, and it's always been a big discussion in the industry because I think as life progresses and your business progresses, you get bogged down in what you're doing, and you sort of think that that's the only way to do it, and you create as many efficiencies within your little bubble that you know how to do, but there's still so many SIL providers out there that I think are missing out on the benefit of working with an SDA provider for their participants. That takes a lot of stress out of what they're doing and how they're doing it.
It's stressful enough. I mean, this has all come up. You and I attended an NDIS seminar in Brisbane a few weeks back, and there were some SIL providers there speaking about they're operating on 1.5% margins. And we thought, wow, is that indicative of what's going on? And yesterday, a partner and I caught up with another SIL in Brisbane, and she was sharing, she's been in the business for 25 years. So a long time, used to run a really profitable business. And now they're running at maybe 1.5% margins as well. So, and we're hearing that. Yeah.
A lot. Yeah.
And so imagine, and look, I've been there. I've been in business a long time, and I've been in businesses where I can't pay. I'm working to pay the staff and pay taxes. We all had times like that.
Been there too. Yeah. It's
hard. It's really hard. And when you're in it, and you're sort of white knuckling, your fingertip on the edge, you're like hanging on.
Yeah.
When you're in it, it's really hard to look at how else can I do this smarter, because every day is survival.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that's what happens a lot of the time in this particular conversation piece is, that SILs are out there doing the support, they're doing the hard yards, and it's very much a needed service, but having time to assess your business strategy and to find other solutions that's going to increase your profit margin, decrease your administration time. You don't necessarily start thinking about accommodation and how can we do this better, especially with, the combination of rising rents and, a decrease in available rentals to house participants together to provide supports efficiently.
Yeah, this fella in Brisbane a few weeks back when we were there, he was saying I think it might have been a house in Rockhampton. He was paying $500 18 months ago. Same house today is like $700. There's no difference to the house.
Yeah.
I think so that cost has to come from somewhere. So do you take it out of the participant's pension, which is their leftovers getting smaller and smaller and smaller, or does the SIL have to eat it and their margins down at 1%, right?
That's right. So it does eat into their profit margin considerably. And we all know, across the country in the last couple of years, rental rates have been on a continuous rise. So it's been a really topical issue. But I'll tell you what.
Hunger Games at their rental, isn't it?
Yeah. The DSP certainly hasn't increased in line with that rental rate increase. So, they're not matched. And unfortunately, that has.
And there's power. Utilities rates are going up. I was at a budget lunch a little while ago, and there's councils in Sydney who have increased their rates by 50% and more to keep up with their cost pressures.
Yeah.
Imagine your rates on a house in the western suburbs going from like $4,000 to $6,000 in 12 months, right? Like
Yeah.
overnight even. Like that's so. I think so. What we're doing here is creating the context, the environment that SILs find themselves in. They're in an environment where the payments that they can draw upon are being meddled with. There's strong downward pressure from the minister all the way down about cutting costs within the NDIS. There's cost of living increases. So there's downward pressure and upward pressure, and in the middle is the squeeze. And that squeeze is where the SILs operate. And it's like, how do you get on with that?
Yeah, and I think opening up these conversations, this is why we do this, is to help get those solutions out into the market that we can see, but is a new concept for a lot of companies and a lot of participants. So I think the main point we wanted to discuss today that is a sort of passion point and a pain point at the same time is we can help create those efficiencies, and the reason that SDA support and service provision, so SIL delivery, are separated is so that you've got one provider managing the accommodation, the costs, the administration, and all of the bits and pieces that are encompassed under accommodation. And then you've got the support provider who's absolutely needed there and is 100% a piece of the puzzle, but it takes that cost of managing all of that away from them. And it also allows that lovely bridge between participant and accommodation provider, that participant to build those life skills on having their own lease, on paying their own bills, on being responsible for, understanding their rental budget and all the things associated. But it takes that risk and that cost off the support provider by separating those two services out. And I think that's sometimes something we've come up against in that thought pattern from service providers is that, well, if they don't hold a head lease, they're not in control of it. And from our perspective, we don't see it as who's in control and who can make the decisions on who the support provider is in a house. In a house, the support provider is chosen by the participants. So that remains with the participants, as it always has and will be. The accommodation provider manages the accommodation like a property manager, but more complex, obviously being SDA. And the support provider manages the supports. In the old model, with a support provider managing accommodation, taking a head lease, paying the rent when there's a vacancy, organising water bills and utilities to be paid, and doing that big administration piece takes a lot of administration time and business resource to do. If they don't have to do that anymore,
that's the key thing. So if you've got a SIL house, right, and you've got to manage the bills and allocate it, apportion it to the usage, and invoice it back off their pension, and handle things like there's a hole in the wall, I need to blah blah blah, right? They're non-billable hours, right? So in an environment where your margins are at 1% and you've got all these non-billable hours looking after a property, and then you've got, if a client does move out and you've got a gap in that house for a week, a month, 6 months, any moment in time, if you've got a head lease on it, then as a SIL, you've got to eat that cost and that portion of the utility, right? So it seems like, and I've been really doing a lot of thinking about this. It seems like there's just a tremendous amount of risk for SILs with accommodation, that whole piece. And in part of my other life, I support farmers in regional Queensland with their labour hire, and I own accommodation businesses, and there's three parties that make it work. There's the worker. There's the labour hire contractor, and then there's the accommodation / transport provider. And you need all three people to be doing their job. Sorry, the labour hire contract also means the farm. So the worker, the farm, and the accommodation, right? You need all those three. Without any one of those three things, nothing gets done.
And it's similar here,
Right, but you want, in my experience in that world, when it works best is when you've got a really good cohort of workers, a really great farm, and a really good accommodation facility, and they're all good at that one thing. and they stay in that lane.
Yeah, yeah.
Where I've seen the wheels fall off is when farmers want to be accommodation providers, or accommodation providers want to be farmers,
Yeah.
or provide the work. Like it
Yeah.
gets to that you can't be all things to all people.
Yeah.
And in this environment, you've got the participant, the client, the tenant, which however you would like to label that person.
Yep.
You've got the property / landlord. You've got the SIL who manages supports in the property, and you'll have the property manager / SDA provider. Now there's 4 people in this scenario, but you need all these 4 people to do their things really well. And without any one of those things, right, without an SDA provider, all of a sudden the SILs have to manage all this stuff, and they're trying to be all things to all people. And all these resources are being expended that don't have to be, to try and do something that is in the expertise lane of someone else. But it does all hinge upon the participant, the client, having an SDA in their plan.
Yeah, well, look, and yes and no, which is, I won't get too much into that today, but a lot of the time, let's say, the SIL provider you were talking with last week, they come to you and they say, hey, Dave, I've got a need for a house in this area. I've got 3 participants that really want to stay together. Only one of them is SDA approved. What can we do? We love a challenge like that, and it's something that I think we pride ourselves on being able to find solutions for. We are there to provide housing solutions, hence the name, and really can work with lots of different models to piece together a good house group, I guess. I shouldn't use the group word.
Walk me through that one. Just say there is 3 people. They all want to stay together. There's only one SDA between them. How would we tackle something like that? That's a great on the court example.
Yeah. So it happens often, and what we would normally do is make sure that person's SDA eligibility was right for the property they were looking at, and the other housemates.
So maybe explain that. Maybe for someone who doesn't swim in this water, what does that person's SDA eligibility mean?
So SDA eligibility is varied depending on what the NDIS deem as reasonable and necessary for them, and the amounts sort of go up on a sliding scale depending on how, like what design level and building type is most suitable for that person. And so there's sort of that entry level SDA of improved livability. The funding associated to the participant to live in that kind of house is at the lower end. And as they go up in need and design level to meet their needs, so does the price that follows them go.
So it might be, this participant is eligible for a space in a 3-bedroom, fully accessible house.
Yep. Yeah.
Right. Or if they're or if they're lower needs, it could be a bedroom in an improved livability house.
Yeah. And
so if you're a SIL and you've got a person who needs maybe a room in a fully accessible house, we might go, okay, well, these 2, they all want to move together, and we can, and there's, so what are the mechanisms within the allowances from the NDIS where those other 2 people could come in?
Yeah, so if the other 2 people are not approved for SDA, but they do want to live together, then we would apply Appendix H to the person that does have SDA in their plan. And what it would do is actually increase their SDA funding so that those other 2 bedrooms were able to be leased out to non-SDA residents. And what it does is actually, increases the financial amount that the investor is going to get. And we would then collect a contribution from the 2 other residents that were non-SDA to create a fairly good return for an investor. But it's only with 1 SDA resident instead of 3. So they are coming down in financial feasibility for that property a little bit. But what you're getting is a household that want to live together. It's still usually a very viable financial return, and
I suppose
a long-term housing solution, which is the ideal outcome.
Also for a group like that, like, again, if you're a SIL and you've got a SIL house and you've got a really happy house, but you recognise that your margins are too thin, and if a business is operating at 1% for a year, maybe 2, it's all over. Like you can't sustain that for longer than, if you've got some savings, if you've got some mental stamina, maybe 2 years, maybe. Right. And at that point, you close the doors, you need to do something else, right? So if you're wondering, oh, how do I, you're doing these ones, and it's like, okay, maybe accommodation, I can get rid of it. And so this is just one example of many, right? So there's, and no two examples are the same, but here's a sort of on the court one. You've got a happy house. One of your people has SDA in their plan, but they're happy in the house, so they stay. Or you think they're probably going to get an SDA if they apply, which we can also help you with the application process and navigating that.
Mm-hmm.
The happy house, if you could move them to an SDA home and they're happy together, they're happy with you, it's very unlikely they're going to go and choose a different supports provider. So there's no loss in supports, but there's a removal of all of that accommodation headache, the risk, the expense, and the admin overhead.
That's right. Yeah.
I sent an email yesterday and I asked the question, what would it be like for a business if you could maintain your support payments and remove a whole pile of that kind of headache?
Yeah. And that'd be ideal for a lot of people. And, at the end of the day, you're getting, the participants are getting to live in a house that's going to make their life easier. They've got accessible bathrooms, no steps to navigate. Like these properties are purpose built for people with a disability. So you're going to be, providing
superior house.
Yeah, superior house. So providing supports in a superior house is going to be better for your workers. It's going to be easier to provide supports, less risk, and the participants are going to be able to do more things independently with your support. So it's a much better outcome for all. And from that business perspective we've been speaking about, it really does reduce a lot of the risk and administration costs for a SIL provider.
Yeah, and we'll probably start to wrap this up because I really just want to underscore a couple of key points here, and that'll take us to about 20 minutes, which is our favourite kind of episode.
Yeah.
Unless Phil or Greg join us, in which case 20 becomes 40. So
often, yeah.
So if you're a SIL rocking a 1% return, firstly, we get it, really. And we know how stressful it is, and we know it keeps you awake, and we know that your mental health is probably suffering. And I know I've been there, Loz, I think you've been there, and it's the pits, and it's important. A healthy business is a profitable one. That's just it, right? So the question becomes, and it's hard to ask the kind of questions when you're in this mess. The question becomes, how can I make this business now a profitable one because I like what I do? It's maybe look at, is accommodation an area of your business you can divest? Can you just get out of it, right? If it's a yes, if it's a hard no, no problem. Thanks for watching. No stress.
Yeah.
Hakuna Matata, right? If yes, then reach out to Disability Housing Solutions. There's lots of ways to get to the end point where you have a profitable business again that makes you best able to support these people long term. And there's ways to do it that are creative. Not when I say creative, I mean we can work on different scenarios well together. And really minimize the chances that you're losing clients who are happy to stay together. We're certainly not going to introduce new people. Clients always have choice of control. This is true. But we're not going to be dropping business cards all over the place, right? So it's a real option. So I've been speaking to a lot of SILs in the past couple of months. And there's a real standoffishness, I suppose you could say. Would that be a fair word, Loz?
Yeah, it depends which angle you look at it. It could be a lack of understanding, I think, is a lot of the time the case.
Yes, fair. Yeah, and also lack of knowledge, about what it is and isn't. So have I wrapped that, do you think, in a little bow? Is that?
Yeah, I think so. I think, our goal here is to just sort of unpack it with you, and to show providers out there that might be on that edge of sort of saying, like, what can I do to make this better? How can I provide a better service in a better environment without increasing my costs, which will send me broke?
Yeah.
And we're there to try and work through those solutions in terms of the accommodation with you. So it is about making those calls and you know, working through that option together to see whether it does achieve those things, which is reduce that risk for you, reduce that administration and that cost for you, and provide a better outcome for your participants, your support team, and your business.
Yeah.
So they're the solutions that we're you know, we explore on the daily, but there are still so many providers out there that don't have the time to unpack that and don't have the resources to come out and try and put the pieces together. So that's why we're doing these sessions, so it's nice and neatly in a bow, like you said.
That's why we're here. We're here to provide solutions. Everything.
Yeah.
We're not going to provide solutions about how you best provide support for certain, but accommodation solutions, we're you guys. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Loz.
No worries.
Until
Always a
next
pleasure.
time.
Thanks, Dave. Bye.